Yo, what's up guys? You are probably expecting this video tier list of all of the Jujutsu Kaisen collab units. I made this similar video on this with the Witcher collab. This was the Witcher collab tier list. It is somewhat of a common trend for Kantos to release units that are not that good. We saw that with the Cookie collab, we saw that with the Street Fighter collab, we saw that with the AC collab, we saw that with the Witcher collab. We also now currently kind of see that with the Jujutsu Kaisen collab. So for that reason, well, you can see it over here. I had a little bit of weird ass tiers with like things that need to be buffed, two things that are kind of good or usable, nothing that was OP, and then a whole bunch of things that needs a buff. So in this case of more making a tier list comparing A to B and also having it ranking that the units at the top are better than the units at the bottom. Well, the other one was kind of doing that as well. But I have these current tiers right now. OP, good, one buff, like usable, but one buff away from being actually good. One buff away from being good, so they're not currently not usable or very niche usable. Two buffs away from being good, and then pretty terrible kid needs a lot of rework or needs a lot of buffs and then rework for it to work. So I think that these tiers make a little bit more sense with the current units that we have. I might think of something later and kind of switch this out, but I do think that these are pretty decent to classify these units. So with this, we're also, of course, going to be looking at the multipliers. Those are available already. I think it is readable on the screen. That's why the screen is not that big. Yep. We can also see what kind of awakenings they have, because it's kind of hard to see in the game what kind of awakening they have. And boy, let me tell you, a lot of these awakenings do not make any sense. So let's just get into it. And we start first off with the Sukuna. That is the one we get free to play. It is a pretty interesting unit. It does have the critical rate 38 on Dark, which is not that interesting, I would say. But yeah, okay, just the leader skill's not that crazy about it. This is the one that has the attack that ignores damage reductions, and also if your attack power is higher than the enemy defense, you deal a lot of damage. I've seen that it's being used a few times in RTA, or actually quite a few people trying this unit out in RTA. Also, that skill 2 can go up to 6 hits, and it does arm or break. It does have a decent rate to arm or break, so it is a decent skill itself. And then the passive, I think the passive part about him is the one that makes him a little bit less interesting. If he had a slightly different passive or something added to the passive, he would be very good, because the skill 1 and the skill 2 seem pretty strong. Like in general, those are just two very good hits. But him having just the sake of just getting a little bit of HP back if the threshold of 30% wasn't met. Interesting fact though, if you heal block it, it is like a Jasun skill 3. Fallen Blossom doesn't care about any of like heal blocks or anything like that. Third skill of Sukuna is exactly the same. It doesn't care about heal block. So even through heal block, it still starts healing. But 30%, it's not a super amount, like that kind of stuff. Most cases, I think people would build him speed, crit rate, attack, and then just try to add in a lot of attack. He does have Accuracy Awakening, which does make quite sense on this unit. So I think that this one is actually probably one of the better units out there, but I would say he's actually good. I do think it's actually a pretty good unit, especially if you compare it to the others, because trust me, the others are a lot less interesting. But I would still say that if you slightly buff the passive, I think his passive can get something slightly extra. Maybe getting some extra A to B if something happens or anything like that. Or maybe life draining a little bit, or I don't even know what. Maybe like a passive buff in there if he takes a turn. It could be a lot of things that you could add into this, but I think that he needs a little bit more on his passive, and then I would say that the skill 1 and skill 2 definitely do make sense for the rest of the kit, and then it would be a pretty good unit. So I would place him in good right now, but I would still recommend to say like, okay, the skill 3 passive can be a little bit improved. Then next up are all the Itadoris or Yujis. Let's start off with water. They all have the leads that are for guild content, but there's none of them that has the lead for guild content that would also provide a speed lead. So that's kind of sad to see. I was hoping that at least one of them would have a speed lead in guild battle. Would they ever change one of them to be speed lead in guild battle? It would already be a lot more interesting. But let's look at the skills. We have the multipliers that are not super high, but there are a lot of multi-hits itself. So we have a 1.3 3 times. It's pretty decent. So you can definitely force in additional damage artifacts on this one. So that definitely would help out a little bit. First skill is the 3 times hit with the ignore all damage reduction. The second skill is attack the enemy 4 times. First 3 hits having a chance to leave a branding, and then you start hitting more. So it definitely does do a decent amount of damage on this skill. However, it does also destroy HP, so I would say it's maybe like a Julian counter. It's maybe doing something like that, because you do have the passive in there that kind of would make you a Julian counter. However, he does need a setup to make him kill anything. So I think that he is pretty good. It is just for him to solo kill a Julian or for him to solo kill a Theomars, or for him to maybe solo kill a Federica. I think a Federica he might be able to solo kill, because those in most cases are pretty squishy. So I would say is a decent unit, but would I place him in one buff away from being good? I think, yeah, it's hard to say. Like, would he do his job better than for, let's say, a Rocky? Because in the end, Rockies we don't use all too much as well. It might, but I think he's slightly too little on damage, like 1.2 times 4. He does add in a little bit extra damage with the 20% if you land a crit. Of course, you're gonna crit. He has the crit awakening, which definitely does make a lot of sense on him. But I think if you slightly add more damage to him, it helps out a little bit more. Plus, he has that weird mechanic once again where you destroy HP, but you also want to kill things. And if things are killed, destroyed HP doesn't really make too much sense. So it's a little bit the back and forth where he's like, okay, he's the last one to supposedly do the damage, but he also destroys the HP. So let's say that you would give him a second turn. Like, let's say you do a first hit and then you lower the HP, you destroy HP, and then a second hit, you do something more. Something like that would be nice. But for that, I think you would need your skill 2 on a shorter cooldown than a 3-turn cooldown with it, which it is right now. So I would say he is good right now. I think he's actually one buff away from being good because this cooldown is too long. If you make this cooldown shorter, because there's a lot of units that have like a similar kind of skill that has the 3-turn cooldown, or that has the 2-turn cooldown rather than the 3-turn cooldown. Look at the Julian skill 2, for example, Validule skill 2, super loaded kit, those kind of things. So I would say he's one buff away from being good, because he definitely would need his skill 2 to kill things. His skill 1 is probably not going to make that. So I would say cooldown on the S2, but I think he is usable. I think he is usable. Then let's look at the Fire 1. Fire 1 has attack power in guild battle. Same skill 1 has a critical awakening over there, but then the critical rate awakening, while the skill 3 has a always lands as critical hit. Contos, just give this man like speed awakening or even accuracy awakening. Yeah, he absorbs attack bar, he does destroy or like defense break. Also, this skill has like 50% extra critical hit. So this whole critical awakening doesn't make any sense, and that's actually a thing that we're gonna see a lot throughout this whole collab. A lot of these awakenings don't really make too much sense, but yeah, critical awakening for this doesn't make too much sense. I do think, however, that he is pretty decent in the amount of HP that he can destroy. I can see this being used as maybe like a Byuncho counter, destroy HP, so the Byuncho's not going to do too much damage. So I definitely could see this one being used, but I would really like to see a different awakening on him, because in this case, you only need like 20 crit rate, and then this one is maxed out already. Maybe you want to go for maxing out this one, but I would say that just... you could even go lower crit rate, because in the end, this skill is already doing that. I have seen, however, that this multiplier of 4.6 is absolutely really freaking low. Cyrus has a 4.9 and then also does a 50% extra damage if you have higher attack. So... and then it also resets. So just as an example, I couldn't really think of a unit that has like a clear one-to-one example of just doing pure damage. Sure, it also does destroy HP and it absorbs their attack bar. And yeah, it's nice and all, but I would say a 4.6 for just this amount of damage. It does have the guaranteed crit, but I would say it's kind of on the low side. Like, I've seen people test with that and they've been hitting like 40k or 50k with like a super slow Fire Itadori. So I think that it's kind of on the low side. It's maybe Zyros higher on base attack. It is a little bit higher on base attack, but yeah, I would say that this just needs a little bit more. I can see it being used in Siege, mainly a Siege unit. I wouldn't say too much of an RTA unit, whereas this one looks a little bit more RTA focused. Could be used in Siege, but I would say pretty decent, but one buff away from being good. If you would change this to speed, would be amazing. If you change this to accuracy, I think would be nice as well, because you do have some accuracy checks in these skills itself as well. And the skill 1, once again, yeah, doesn't really matter too much. Plus, you have the issue of the cooldowns being slightly long. I wouldn't mind, once again, if this one also gets a cooldown decrease of 1, because otherwise it's just pretty lengthy, I would say. Moving on, next one to the Wind one. Wind one is a 4-star, so therefore we also see the 4-star stats. The 6-star stats on these seem pretty low, but it might be that more units have that something similar. I would say that, once again, skill 2, if you -1 that cool time, would be definitely very nice. The skill 3 is it removes all beneficial effects and then it absorbs the attack bar and then it always lands as a crit. This one doesn't have the crit awakening because it's a 4-star, so I guess it awakens into getting the leader skill. Not the most interesting of leader skills out there. I would say he's mainly a 4-star for Siege, but I don't think he adds anything too interesting to the 4-star Siege Bruiser meta that we currently have. But I could see him being used. But yeah, it's just like niche for Siege. But I think we place him in usable, but one buff away from being good still. Because this skill, it seems pretty interesting. Like you attack something, you drain like half the attack bar, and then you always crit. You also absorb into like doing that, or you remove beneficials into doing the damage and then absorb. So there's something that's is okay. You could say like, oh, my unit didn't strip everything and this was actually the damage dealer, but then I kind of like still strip and do damage. But it's kind of in a weird position where it's like, okay, how does that order that I just mentioned actually make very much sense? So I think he is decent, he is usable, but I wouldn't really claim him that great. Then we go on to the light one. I thought the light one was super interesting, but a few guildies of mine actually did point out a pretty big flaw in his kit. And that is like, sure, it has a skill 1 and a skill 2 of that we have already seen. I think that these are pretty decent skills by itself. And then we have gains immunity against continuous damage. And the main continuous damage unit out there right now is a Vitra. That is the Dark Asura. It is definitely good into that. However, the big issue is the Dark Asura also gives armor break. Therefore, not just the Dark Asura is focusing this, but the whole team is focusing this. And the moment you put immunity on this, yeah, you could, and then it still doesn't make too much sense, I guess. So you actually have to resist harmful effects. Wait, would this actually work if you resist harmful effects while you have immunity? Do you just get full attack bar based on that? Okay, I just tested it. Good thing that you can test everything in the Siege thing right now. That makes things kind of chill. But yes, it actually does count towards if you have immunity in any debuff that you're getting at that moment, you will gain 30% attack bar. It even is that if you get multiple hits, let's say a Rika skill 3 or a Nefty skill 2, all of those multiple hits that would apply something, you do gain attack bar. So you would gain a lot of attack bar on that. You just have to make sure that you get immunity on you. So I would say that makes it a little bit better than I expected, because you do have the big issue that he will get, well, he's just a big issue for getting armor broken. But if his passive still works while he has immunity, I think he is pretty strong on that sense. Once again, cooldown on this one seems a little bit lengthy, because killing a Vitra with a skill like this is not really going to happen. However, with a skill like this, I can definitely see him getting a chance of killing a Vitra or killing anything that is on the defense. So I would say good, but still one buff away from being actually very good. I would maybe place him over here, though. I think he has potential. I would still recommend him to get the extra buff, because now he doesn't really have that much of the kill potential. But the thing is, it's only good against the Vitra, or only good against like very specific things where like RTA you're not really going to be seeing him using. So I would say him this, because he's very niche in one thing, and even in that thing he's not doing it insanely well. So I'm gonna place him over there. It seems like the whole Itadoris is just over there. They're all usable, but they're not really great. Let's look at the Dark one. Dark one is pretty interesting. You were actually able to use this one in the collab dungeon, or the collab like event dungeon. Yeah, that's pretty much what it's called, I guess. This thing was doing his skill 3 pretty much all the time. So we were like, okay, does he have perfect AI? But he's having very good AI on this skill. The thing is, once again, crit awakening, and then saying like, okay, this land will always land as, or this hit will always land as a crit. Make this a speed or make this an accuracy, and he's already a lot better. In this case, I would say speed makes most sense for him. And the same thing with this. So I would definitely say that this unit is pretty good. You would have to like hit that 50% every time to actually reduce all of your cool times. But if you do manage to do that, I think this unit is pretty good. He does do an insane amount of damage. You don't even care that much about this skill. You just get a shit ton of hits in. Plus, it is somewhat difficult to kill this unit if he keeps getting Endure. Maybe he needs a little bit extra on that, or just the awakening of the like being slightly different. But I would say that he is pretty good. I would still say is good, but is not OP, so good. Can still use a buff. I think we're just gonna make it that, because for the Sukuna, it's kind of the same thing. It's good, but can still use a buff, and then it's like OP is just OP, doesn't need any changes, I guess. Let's put that there. Why not? While we're at it. So moving on to the next one, we go for the Nobaras. Starting off with the Water one. Water one has a pretty interesting kit. So we have the skill 1 that goes for the heal block. Skill 2 that goes for preventing from receiving any buffs. And the skill 3 goes for the preventing them from removing harmful effects, and then also a dot. It is a pretty interesting one. I would definitely say that this is something you could use in the Layla, Hey Gang, blah, 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 those kind of unit teams. The only big issue is who would you replace? Because technically the only unit that normally puts the cleanse block is Layla, but she doesn't necessarily strip. So for the reason that she doesn't necessarily strip, she doesn't really become a Layla replacement because Layla does strip. So she would actually need to get a strip on skill 3 or a strip on skill 2 to become a full-on Layla replacement. You could say like, okay, it's the damage dealer replacement. It is decent, but the issue is it's 80% to land and you get 2 continuous damage. It is not that much. It could be kind of like your Water Rika-ish kind of things with a little bit of extra stuff, but it's kind of weird because those units in general take, like this one also gets 10% every extra damage for every harmful effect. But you're nowhere near into a damage dealer. Like the base attack is not crazy. You're not awakening in crit rate. Accuracy in this case, of course, makes a lot of sense. But therefore, that 10% just doesn't make too much sense in my opinion. So I think she's decent. I think she's usable. But I would say by minimum, this has to be a 100% land. Because if this is not a 100% land, then this skill feels just really bad in the first place. And I would say that there kind of needs like to be a strip in her kit or something like that. So I would say it's usable, but still definitely at least 1 buff away from being good. Then we have the fire one, which is also a 4-star. Skill 1, same. Skill 2. I don't like this skill 2. I've seen it being used a few times. I would say that I maybe like this skill 2 in like TOA Hell stages or TOA like the COA stages. But the big issue is it's random. So you're randomly hitting things and nothing is actually getting provoked. Like I've seen a whole bunch of RTA matches with her or like the counterparts that also have this same skill. She's just throwing a few nails and nothing is actually going to get provoked for a very lengthy time. Unless you already throw an AoE provoke before that. Then you definitely do increase it quite a bit. So it is decent next to a cigar, or counterparts are nice next to a cigar, but it is not that great. There's a few extra provoke units in the game right now, which is also the Gojo on Wind. So it's maybe a nice pair with that. So we haven't really seen her max potential on that. But the skill 2, it looks a little bit weird. Like I'm not too sure about it. Then we have the skill 3 that is proportional to your max HP. And then we also have glancing, and the second hit is an attack bar reduce. I'm not too sure about this one. Well, it is also a 4-star. Like in the end, the Witcher collab 4-stars, most of them are pretty much non-used at all. And I think she will kind of fit that, where I would say it can be used, but it's a very niche, specific, whatever kind of thing that I don't think she is any good anytime soon. Wouldn't necessarily say she has a terrible kit, but it's kind of a weird one. But it is a 4-star, and some of these 4-stars are just simply feeding for the net 5 skill up, so it's not too bad to have like one bad unit in there, I would say. So then we have the Wind one. Wind one is a 5-star. We have that same skill 2, which I talked about just before. So once again, I would say it's, unless you place it next to another unit that is very good with provoking, this skill is not going to be great. And then you have 2 provokers, but 2 provokers are countered by the same thing. A Juno, a Detra, a Varomos, like all of those units would hard counter these provokes, so I'm not too sure for it, like for the usage that way. However, I would say that this might be interesting for a COA stage. However, excluding bosses. So that's the bad part. If this would include bosses, you could cheese the living shit out of bosses, which I don't think is that bad in the first place. But yeah, it would be nice if they would destroy at least some HP. Let's say it's just reduced HP on the boss, but you still lower some HP on the boss, and then you could go in for like a Jean plus her, and then you have like super extended provokes, and you can make it work that way. Because now her whole kit just doesn't make too much sense, because I wouldn't use this in PvE, like or in PvP. She's not really a PvP unit. Sure, you could maybe place it in some siege offense hits, but I think she is, from what we have all seen right now, maybe I'm being harsh on her and she's just 2 buffs away from being good, but I don't really like that 3rd skill. If the 3rd skill doesn't work on bosses, I'm not really sure how that this would be any kind of usefulness, because in the end, let's say you put her to siege, you need a unit that provokes, then you need her, and then you still need another protection unit, and then you would have to kill those things by the provokes that she is taking or something like that. So it's maybe, but it's still like the if you have a harmful effect on you while you gain the turn. That's not even a guaranteed. So I think she's just a pretty badass, the kid. So let's move on to the light one. Light one has the same skill 2 we talked about. I don't really like that skill 2. Skill 1, same thing. Resistance Awakening, I guess. Like, I think Accuracy Awakening makes more sense for them. I think she had Accuracy Awakening. Yeah, this is Resistance Awakening. It's not the worst, but then we have that third skill set. Yeah, this skill is just very weird. I'm not too sure. Like, I've asked a few people that have her, and they were all like, yeah, she kind of does her thing, but also not really-ish, something like that. Maybe she fits the role a little bit more than the wind one. I do think she's more of like a 2 buffs away, because the third skill kind of makes a little bit more sense. At least you can use it on bosses. It maybe can deal some damage. Maybe it's kind of a bruiser thing. Maybe you can kind of use it in a prolonged siege fight or anything like that. I can see the usage of this, but it's nowhere near anything super great at the moment though. So I'm just gonna place her over there. Moving on next to the dark one is one of those that might actually fit for PvE. It does have a pretty low-ish attack for a PvE unit, but yeah, it does have the skills where in this case you would deal extra damage per harmful effect, which does make a lot more sense in PvE than it did make sense in the previous one. It is an AoE buff block. You don't really need too much AoE buff block. We actually need some single target buff block that always lands in a dungeon that's called Steel Fortress. But this one, it does have armor break, and then you deal extra damage based on like a harmful effect. But this compared to like a Roberta, so let's actually check out the Roberta, is a lot of difference. So we already see multiplier is 3.6 times 2, so that's technically 7.2. This is a 5, but then also enemy max HP. Sure that this is only a 50% increase, but also the base attack, that's not even that much higher. Well, it's a good like 32 extra. So yeah, the multiplier is decent, but there's no enemy HP multiplier. If that part was also in there, she might have had like a little bit of usage over there. Cool time is fine though on this skill, but I would say she needs a little bit more, and then she could probably be used in PvE, but currently she's not a best in slot in PvE. A Luna would outdamage her, a Roberta would outdamage her, probably a Crow would even outdamage her. So for that reason, plus she doesn't really have a super fitting skill 1 for PvE either, that kind of makes it to the sense where I say like, okay, I do see her potential. I do think it is a PvE unit more than a PvP unit in the first place, but yeah, is it really going to work? I'm not sure. Could you maybe use her as a nuker in Siege or something like that? Maybe so, but then, yeah, I don't know. I probably don't really see that as well. So I think she is okay-ish, but probably 1 buff away from being good. Maybe 2, but let's keep her 1 buff away from being good in this case. And going into the Megumis, it has the skill 1, or all of them do have the skill 1, where the skill 1 is a 1 turn on a 50% chance. I don't like that 1 turn. I would have rather seen just attack break or just defense break for 2 turns, rather than both of them for 1 turn, because the odds of that just get super low. It's also like, oh, you hit it right now, but the enemy was at 80% attack bar, so it's gone within like super fast. So that just doesn't make any sense. Whereas if it's 2 turns, it's at least like 1.2 turns there rather than 0.2. Like, do you see the difference? That's a 6 times difference for just being a 1 turn compared to a 2 turn kind of landing anything. So with that in mind, that makes this skill 1 kind of weak, but let's see at the other skills, because most units are not just bound to just skill 1. Yeah, this is the skill that removes 1 beneficial effect and then absorbs. It's not too bad for skill 2, but I would say for the cooldown it has maybe not that great. And then we have the third skill that removes 1 beneficial effects and decrease the attack bar for 50%. It is a pretty hefty decrease in attack bar. That is definitely a thing, but in the end it's a 4-star, so I think it's one of those 4-stars we just don't expect too much of, and then we just call it a day. So I think if you actually want to make him usable, he's probably 2 buffs away from being good. I would say in the main cases, like the skill 1 could be a bit better. Skill 2 and skill 3, it's not even that bad, but I just don't really see him being used as a 4-star stripper over like all of the other strips kind of units that we have in the game. I just don't really see him being used. So I think it's just one of those units similar to hers. Like, she's not even bound to be good. It's just like, oh, we added in a unit with a whatever kit, so we can use this one for skill ups for the other ones. Then we have the fire one, which is probably one of the more interesting units, because it does have a passive. Well, not just the passive. Let's first talk about the actual interesting thing. It has a speed lead of 28. There's not too many units in the game that have a speed lead of 28. And that just makes a unit pretty interesting by itself already. Might you ask why it's not 33? Well, they tend to do this weird thing that if a unit has a 4-star in family, that they lower the lead in the first place. So for that reason, 28 over there. So it is just arena 28. But yeah, it also has the passive in there, which is kind of like an inverted Gyo or like a Diana kind of thing. If you were to AoE hit the whole team, he would get 60% A to B for all, like 20 for each unit. So in RTA, of course, is that. So 3 units times 20, 60% A to B. So he definitely does have that. He also has to remove 1 beneficial effects with a 30% chance when he attack the enemy. 30% chance is the same thing as an Amduet. That is a little bit low. I don't really like the 30% on that. If there was a slightly bit higher, it would have been pretty nice. And then we have the skill 2, which has a stun chance. The stun chance goes up to 100 and then decreases the attack bar for the stunned enemy if it already had a harmful effect. So I would say pretty decent support. It's very close to Gyu kind of skills of like just disrupting while getting turns when the enemies did stuff to you before. It's not as much of a Diana for that case because Diana takes a turn and starts like pew-pewing someone to death. But this one is more of like a disruptor, can land some stuff, can be annoying, maybe a despair unit because it starts taking a lot of turns, but the turns itself that he takes are not super impactful. Would it therefore necessarily be very good? Well, we do know a unit that has a 33 speed lead and is still considered very bad. That is Trinity. But Trinity is just a pure on damage dealer. This is more of a support role. So I would say a support role for a speed lead definitely does fit a little bit better. So I think he is good, but he could still be getting a buff. And I think that buff is probably still in that skill 1. I feel like the skill 1 doesn't do enough. And if you make the 2 turns, it's just like 100 times better. And this skill 3, maybe you give it a little bit more chance to strip. I think that would maybe be a fair thing. And you could maybe lower the cooldown on this. Like one of those 3 buffs would do. If you do all 3, it might be pretty strong. But I think that he is good. But he definitely could still use his buff. But I could see this one being used. Now we have the Wind one. Wind one is pretty interesting. It's the first unit in game which actually has attack bar increase, attack buff, and invisibility all in one skill, which just pretty much makes him like on the same spot as like a Bastet or anything like that. That's pretty much to the point where Bastet skill 1, skill 2, do we even look at those? We don't really give a shit. It's just mainly this. It does have attack power lead for arena, which is also pretty interesting for an arena unit in the first place. And I would say that this is pretty good into all of those reflect kind of defense, because there's a few defense out there with like an Alexandra or any kind of reflex or like even a Samath. If you do have that invis, you're just not going to take any damage. And this is an invis for all allies. So sure, it makes it very good with Katarina. That's what most people were saying right away. Like, oh, Katarina this, Katarina that. Makes a lot of sense. But what is the issue to an Adriana if you use your Adriana and then your Leia moves and Leia just kills your whole team because of Alexandra reflex? You're not going to have this issue with the invisibility. However, does that make the unit really good and perform better than an Adriana in most cases? No, it just has very different tuning. Katarinas are not used that much. I think that a Katarina is probably best used in Siege because of less targets and you have that random shifting of like how many things you hit with a Katarina. So I do think he is good. It is just maybe that the meta where he's in, it doesn't really fit him too well. Like there's other units that do better than him, but I would say his kit itself is unique and good. It's more of like trying to find like a right spot of a best in slot in meta, rather than his kit actually being bad. So I would say can be used, can still be using a buff. I'm not entirely sure what kind of buff I would be thinking of. The only buff, no, actually there's one buff I can think of. Remove this, put that in there. Simplest buff ever, and then you would make him very strong. If this is a 116 base with an attack bar increase, attack buff, and invisibility, then you would make him very strong and very unique. In this case, he's just like, okay, he's just like a Bastet. A little bit more speed than a Bastet. He can do that, and this thing is niche. It's not always needed. But if you make him 116 base, I think he would be very good. So I think I'll place the Wind one over there, mainly for the chance, like, you can use him right now, absolutely, but give him that 116 base, and he would be a very good unit right there. Wouldn't necessarily make him like super OP, but that would make him at least a best in slot in something. Looking at the light one, it is a 4-star, which I actually would have liked to see as a 5-star. And the main reason for that is, well, the base stats are just lower. There's no awakening to that. If you were to give this a speed awakening, it would be very nice. But this is a very interesting one on the skill 3. It decreases the duration of the beneficial effects. And after that, you perform the block of harmful effects. This thing doesn't match that thing. So let me actually double check in game which one it is. Yeah, it is the harmful effect. It's not this one, but the other one. It's like the you can't cleanse. So it goes for the anti-cleanse. So that makes sense. It's not this one, but it's the anti-cleanse. So I would definitely say that that is a very nice unit because it full-on counters Hey Gang. It's not just countering Hey Gang by this part. It's actually countering Hey Gang by this part already, which is actually pretty strong. So I definitely do like this unit. It's just weird that he is a good counter into a Hey Gang while being a 4-star. That just kind of makes him on like a weird-ish spot. Would still say that that thing is not that great. This skill, it's just okay. It's not that great either, but it's just okay. But then the question, most of the times when you see a 4-star, you're thinking more about like 4-star Siege because it's locked into the 4-stars. Are you actually going to be using this in 4-star Siege? No. So for that reason, I would say he's okay, but he's also... I guess you can use him, but he's kind of one buff away from being exceptional at what he does. Because in the end, like, sure, you can use this to counter Hey Gang, but you might as well just use a Tiana that also counters Hey Gang, or a bunch of other units that also counter Hey Gang, but then also do more. Like a Robo in the end, if it lands, it also does more than on a Hey Gang. So there's a few things that probably do more than he does. He is usable, but I think there's a few units that would do a lot more than what he would do. Then we have the Dark One. Dark One has one of the longest animations and also the longest names on that third skill. It does have that skill for the stun as well. Yeah, the cooldown on this one is just the one that I'm still like, This one, it hit 4 times. Actually, there was someone in my chat saying that this thing always lands same as Tiana. That is actually not the case. I did test that. The only thing that I don't really like about this is this part. Why would you land a attack power for 2 turns? That just doesn't make any sense. Like, this part is super nice. Like, sure, you have the pushback and a strip. Where else do we know that? Oh, Triton. Okay, but this is a Triton that is a dark element, so that's technically already better as well. Plus, it has the 2 times hit, which is definitely nice. But then the attack break. I don't really get the attack break. Why, of all things, attack break? So for that reason, I feel like he can be used, but I feel like that there's definitely something better potential in his kit to make him better than the attack break. So I would say can be used as a strip, but I think like if you look at all of the strips out there, I wouldn't really classify him as a top class stripper because a lot of those do have like either a lot of damage or something else going on as well. Sure, there's the multi-hit of 4 to do that, but then again, if you look at a more also has a multi-hit on the strip, there's a lot of units that have like multi-hits on strips, so I would say that most of the other strippers would probably perform better than him, so it is okay, but he's one buff away from being actually good. Maybe I would say he is good, but he can definitely still use a buff. I would also say anything that is not in the OP range, like comparing those to one another, like if we pair like other normal Summoners War units to it, I think most Summoners War units would outperform, like any meta unit would probably outperform pretty much everything that's on this already. So they are good, they are usable, but they're still not really great that they would actually outshine like a normal Summoners War unit that we know of. So I think starting from this tier is where you would start using them a lot and seeing them a lot. Whereas in this tier, there's like, you can use them, it's just not that great. Moving on next to the Gojo. I would say Gojo does have some interesting stuff to it, but also some stuff that totally does not make any sense. It has a base speed of 106, which is definitely nice. But there's one big issue. It is defense type. And I did already mention this before when I saw like the previews on some of the units. It is a defense type, and this is actually also what I fear for defense type. It has a skill 2, which has an absolute terrible multiplier. Attractor skill 1 has a 2.04 multiplier. This thing has a 1.5. Sure, it is AoE, but then again, it's a fucking tractor, right? But this skill is attack based. This thing has no attack. This cooltime, sure, it is 3-turn cooldown, but I think like for this, like how bad this is, like this skill is pretty much just useless. I would say that this needs to be at least a 3-turn cooldown, or he has to get an awakening rather than accuracy. Awaken his skill 1 to be a defense type kind of damage dealer as well, because this skill 1 just absolutely doesn't make any sense. I would also say that the 2 to 3 hits, I think is just crap. Just always make it 3. Like, I don't think that these units would be anything close to OP if you always make it 3, even the ones that are better than him. Passive-wise, I think it is okay. No attack bar decrease, and then your attack bar gain like 30% the moment you end the turn. Those 2 things are fine. I think that the steal part on this one is pretty nice. It does go up to 50%, but there's a really big difference between 2 times 50% or 3 times 50%. Like, there's an absolute world of difference. Plus, his damage output is near non-existing because of just bad multipliers, and then bad scaling on this one in the first place. So for that reason, I would say 2 buffs away from being good. I think that he is pretty bad. Like, I think he needs 2 things addressed to him to actually make him usable / good as like an AoE strip or kind of thing that you want to use him for. Then the fire one is a pretty interesting one. At least it is an attack type, but the attack type has a resistance awakening. I come to us. Really? Really now? You could have put the resistance awakening on an Itadori and I would have understood it because it actually goes for like high crit rate in the skills itself. But then the one unit that is performing everything towards dealing more damage over here, dealing more damage over here, and this one is like whatever. But and then you go like, yep, that needs a resistance awakening. It's like, is that an Oberon, Sonya, whatever, all of these units once again that in like 2-3 months you're gonna be like, you want crit awakening on those units. Like Ian likes crit awakening but still doesn't have it. That's what you want. Let's just switch it, and that finally makes sense. Like, I just get annoyed by these things, like why does an attack type in the first place? I don't think there is a single attack type in the whole game, maybe with the exclusion of an Icarus, which also doesn't make sense to be an attack type rather than HP type because all of our damage comes from HP, whatever. Yeah, there's not a single one except for that one that would make sense on a resistance awakening. Like none, not at all, non-existing. Like sure, if you want to, like you could be like, oh, I make it 100 res and then like a vampire unit on that. No, you still want Vio on this thing because Vio, the moment you take an additional turns on Vio, this extra 50% instantly goes on because you didn't take any damage for that 50%. This skill itself is pretty interesting. I've seen it 1v1 at Chandra because if the Chandra doesn't proc, you have the issues that if it starts procking, you get screwed. But yeah, you can 1v1 a unit that is similar speed to you and never actually gets like proper hits off because it doesn't multi-hit or if it doesn't proc. So those kind of things are pretty nice. It could be one of those units that is hard to kill. Skill 2 definitely is pretty nice, but once again, cooldown seems a little bit long. I did just check, but Theomars actually has a 3-turn cooldown as well, which this thing has with the -1. So I thought it was one lower, but I would say that Theomars has a way better skill 1 because it's still scaling to his speed, whereas this thing, the skill 1, is a little bit worse. Sure, it's still scaling with this thing, but also the Theomars has the attribute advantage in this skill as well, where this one, the Gojo, just has it on this. So I would say it's usable, but probably something that would want one extra buff to either remove this, lower the cooldown on that. Yeah, but mainly one of those 2 things. I think he's one of the better ones out there that you could already use. The Wind Gojo is actually one of the dopest skill 3s. He just walks in like, I'm a badass motherfucker. You guys are all provoked. Big issue, however, why is it once again Wind? We already have Cigar, we already have so many disruptors on Wind. We have CP, we have Savannah, we have even Gani Hathor. There's so many disruptors / CC, semi-CC kind of units on Wind. Especially Cigar, that's the main counterpart to this, where I would say like, yeah, because of Cigar, I don't really like this. Thing is, there is this skill 2. This skill 2 does have that strip. So for that reason, he is already pretty interesting. Big thing I don't like, however, once again, Resistance Awakening. He needs accuracy. All of these skills are pure on accuracy based. Like sure, you have the invisibility and the provokes, and because of that, you maybe want your resistance to be high. Maybe. But then again, if you check Cigar, I'm pretty sure Cigar is a accuracy awakening, which I think for this one also makes so much more sense. So for that reason, I'm not too sure about this unit. I do think it is pretty strong. It does have a okay-ish multiplier for a hit that also provides 2-turn AoE provoke, which is pretty strong in the end. Cooldown is decently long on it, but I don't think it is the worst. I think it's pretty much the same as the cooltime on this. Yep, it is the same thing as the Scar cooltime. So it definitely does make sense on those parts. I do think with this skill too, it's a very nice pair as well. However, big issue for him is that he's Wind. That's not something they're gonna change. Like if this was the light or dark, he would fit so much more, because in this case, you still have struggles of provoking anything that is fire. So, and that's just making it a lot worse. But I would definitely say that he is the closest to, well, let's just say none of them are OP anyways. Well, let's actually just add in one extra tier. We're gonna add in the OP tier for there. So I think this we change this to good and no changes needed. I think that this one might be one of the better ones out there. Just the big issue is that Cigar is there. That's just like, if Cigar wasn't in the game, I would say that this one becomes a very good unit. That is definitely a true statement. But since Cigar is in the game, it's not as great. What you can do, however, on this unit is S2 proc into S3, so you have AoE strip into AoE provoke. That is pretty strong, but still Cigar is in there, and then it has Cigar issues. Let's just call it that way. Then let's look at the light one. Light one, not from Cigar, from this thing. Light one has an AoE speed, so that is definitely very nice. There is once again, however, that issue. It is a defense type, and it has that skill one that is pretty useless over here. It does have that AoE strip, which is definitely very nice. And it does have a cleanse, and then an attack bar increase, and then it also has a damage increase for how many things that you actually removed. So I've seen this skill a few times in RTA. It is not a bad skill, but it's also not super OP. So I definitely do think that this one is good. No changes needed. It could be made better. There's a few things that you could tweak to it, but I think that this one is pretty good itself and doesn't really need any changes for itself. Maybe it kind of feels weird to put this one on the same tier as this. Like, I'm not necessarily sure if I would claim him OP or just, let's just say strong. Like, I don't necessarily say like he's overpowered. I would say he's just strong. But yeah, I would say that this one is pretty strong because it is a pretty loaded kit for like a speed lead itself. I could be slightly wrong in those two, but I feel like that these two are pretty much stronger than the other ones out there. And then we have the last one, which is the dark one, which I also think, and I think most people think, is the strongest one out there. It does have that skill too. If that one would get slightly buffed because his partners are getting buffed because of it, it would be very nice, but I would definitely say that he's strong, and he's absolutely also stronger than the other one. But I just keep them in the same tier, I guess. But AoE of Oblivion plus a stun is absolutely very nice. If you were to pull this one, you can do 18 Dark. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, people were like, oh, AoE of Oblivion's, like, oh, or like any Oblivion unit on Dark, and then you're like, yeah, there is... wait, it's just LD5s. Well, now they're still on LD5, but this is the first LD5 that actually does it AoE. So I would definitely say that this kit is a lot better than the whole ISIS kit, because it does have the stun, it does have the skill tier that does damage. There is a lot to it. I definitely do like the accuracy awakening on this, so you can just put it like speed, crit rate, HP, or speed, crit rate, attack, and then still do some damage. Definitely nice. It would actually be more OP if he was the AoE strip. If he had the AoE strip, yeah, I think it would be more OP. The only issue is if he had the AoE strip, he would be a defense type, and I don't really like the defense type with this whole kit. So for that reason, I do think he is fine as is, but that is also making my tier list of these units. Once again, I would also say that I could be very wrong on those. And it's definitely something that balance patches are bound to happen. It's kind of sad to see that Kanto's is just releasing kind of units that are pretty horrible, because in the end, I would say anything that is below these three is probably kind of more waiting for a balance patch rather than anything good. So you can use those units, like definitely those, you can use them, but are there gonna be any like very good? Not really. You can use these units, but they can still use a buff to actually get on point with like normal Summoners War units. And these three I think are fine without a buff right now and are definitely usable. But even for this tier, I would already say like, okay, they can be used, but they're not going to be super great. These ones, they can be used, but they're very niche and they're only going to work in that one niche scenario. And these are just pretty much straight up trash. It's what I kind of think. So that is my take to it. You can definitely disagree. You're always very much allowed to disagree with these tier lists, but this is my opinion on it. And I hope to see if we're like after balance patch in like 2 months, maybe 4 months, maybe like if we have like a patch now that is revolving a lot of these units, I will go back to this list and then also switching around the things what I think based on that balance patch, what maybe is good right now, or maybe just with extra knowledge, or in the end, like the units are just released for 2 days. It might be that there's some like combinations that would say like, oh, this is actually really a bad unit, or would say like, oh, randomly, this is actually very good. So keep that in mind. These units are kind of fresh. We don't know everything yet, but I did try to do a lot of research on those units, did try to do quite some decent testing with some of those units. So this is my take on it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, just clicking on that like button is always appreciated. And today, I'm not even going to ask you to subscribe. So, guys, thanks a lot for watching. See you later. Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more guides, join the Discord and check out the content tab, which has the Dungeon Guide Archive and the Video Guide Archive, which contains all of the guides that you need. Hope to see you there.